Hey, Cornerstone family. Well, one of the things that I have missed over these last several months are restaurants. As the restaurants around us begin to open up, I'm reminded of why I love restaurants so much, because I don't have to do any of the work. I get to sit down and somebody else prepares a meal for us. I mean, that's a gift. It's a really incredible gift. And my favorite restaurants are the ones that bring to you the free bread basket. These are the best, especially when there's the olive oil for you to dip in. I mean, it's so good. And as I was thinking about it, it reminds me of when my wife and I, Lauren, first got married. And I was still in college. And we had a favorite restaurant we loved to go every Friday night. It was this little Italian restaurant. We couldn't really afford anything on the menu except for the cheese pizza. And so we would go and we'd order a small cheese pizza, a couple sodas, and then they had the most glorious free bread basket. And after a while, they knew who we were. They knew where we liked to sit. And they would just keep bringing more and more bread, and we would stuff ourselves for about $15. It was fantastic. And we would crave that bread all week long until we get to Friday night, and we'd go out and enjoy our inexpensive meal and enjoy the free bread basket. What is it about us that loves free bread? There's something about bread that just reminds us of it's a gift to us in order to sustain us, but also to satisfy us, to satisfy our appetites. I mean, we would, as we awaited to go to this restaurant, I remember talking about, man, I can't wait till Friday till we can have that incredible bread. It was like garlicky and buttery and all of that sort of thing. And bread has this way of just giving us a deep appetite. And as we looked at this past week, as Sheldon preached, looking at the fact that Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And we're launching into this new series of who Jesus is. It's the most important question for us to wrestle with. And the fact that Jesus says, I am the bread of life, is he is saying something about who he is, but he's also showing us, as we learned on Sunday, who we are. That we have these deep appetites, desires that go to the very bottom of who we are, of what it means to even be human. And that Jesus is the one that satisfies that. Well, here's what I want to do today, and then in our next devotional, I want to look at John 6 a little bit more, dive a little deeper into this, because there's so much in this particular chapter of what Jesus says about who he is. And it starts off with Jesus feeding the 5,000. Those are 5,000 men, and then there's women and children, so it was probably 10 to 12,000 people, maybe even more, thousands of people that Jesus fed. And I'm going to look at that story the next time. But right after that story, the crowd who sees what Jesus does, that they had their fill. They had as much free bread as they wanted. And their desire and their hunger was completely satisfied. And so they track Jesus down because they're like, we want more of that. And they finally find Jesus. And they're seeking after him. And then Jesus says this is John 6, beginning at verse 26. This is what Jesus says. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. And then he goes on, he says, do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. Then they say to him, they ask Jesus this question. They're like, we want more of this. What must we do to be doing the works of God? They understand that Jesus is getting at something core to who they are, to who God is. And he says this, Jesus answered them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him who has sent me. We just had to pause with that particular statement for a moment, that the work of God is as simple as believing. It's faith, it's trust. There's nothing else you need to do. You want more of that free bread? You want more of your appetite satisfied? Then you simply need to believe me, is what Jesus is saying. And belief is one of those interesting things for us, especially anybody who has grown up in the church for a long time. Maybe you've heard all of these things before. But believing isn't just simply seeing and going, yeah, I know about that. It's actually doing something about it. It's trust. It's if I was to show you the chairs here in my kitchen, and you go, yeah, I believe in those chairs, but there's a difference for you to actually take a seat in those chairs, put your weight upon that chair. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, don't just simply look at me and see what I've done. No, trust me, put your weight upon me. Have faith in me, believe. And Jesus is saying in all of this, that the appetite that you have, the appetite that I have, The appetites underneath the appetites, the appetite for forgiveness, for security, significance, for relationship, for healing in our lives. That appetite, only He can actually meet. Only He can actually satisfy. That's what Jesus is inviting us. And He's saying, don't just see it. Don't just agree and nod your head. Yes, I believe that. But no, actually begin to pursue me because I've pursued you to the end. Know that I satisfy. I am the bread of life. That's what He says. There's this great place in C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. Many of you may know this quote, but he talks about how creatures that would be us and all that God has made, are given desires that are meant to be satisfied. And he goes on and he says it's like a child or a baby that is hungry, and therefore if they're hungry, there must be food. Or a duckling who wants to swim means that there must be water for that duckling to be able to swim. Or a young couple that wants all you can eat bread, that means there must be a free bread basket. And then C.S. Lewis says this, and this is such a well-known quote, but it's worth pondering for a moment. Lewis goes on, he says, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Do you see what's going on here? The reason the crowd is chasing after Jesus and they're like, we want more of that bread, is not just because they had their appetite, their hunger met, but they saw something below the surface. They saw something so much deeper. And when we begin to interact with God through prayer and reading His Word, we begin to see, oh my goodness, there's something far greater going on here than just what I can see. That God actually put something in me to find Him. That He gave us these desires that might be satisfied in Him by coming before Him, by putting our weight and our trust and our faith in Him. That's the work of God. So often we try to work for God to have that desire met. And God's going, no. I've done all the work for you. All you have to do is believe in the one I sent in Jesus. That's what He's inviting. It's like when you sit down at the table and you begin to enjoy the bread that's provided, the free bread that's given to you. But as you enjoy that free bread, you have to think for a moment, what actually did it cost for that bread to get to your table, for it to be free? It's quite a process, isn't it, for bread to get to the table? Because it begins with grain, and that grain has to be crushed. And then that grain is turned into flour and made into dough, and that dough is baked into a loaf, and it eventually makes it to the table so you can enjoy, so you can have your fill. Well, that's what we see in the life of Jesus. We don't have to do the work because He's done it for us. Jesus was the one who was crushed for us. That's what the prophet Isaiah says, that He was crushed for our iniquities, so that we might have peace, so that we might be healed. Those are the desires that we have. That's what we're longing to be satisfied, is the peace and the healing and the forgiveness and the relationship with God and with one another. And Jesus says, find that in me. I make that possible. And so I want to end simply with this. Maybe in all of this, you're going, yeah, Pete, I've heard all this before. Yes, I agree with this. But and wherever you're at, I just want to simply invite you to pause for a moment and listen to God's invitation to you and to me, and to not just have a second-hand spirituality. I think that's something we can struggle with, where we can depend on those who we see as more mature or more spiritually down the road, and we can just agree and say yes and nod. But Jesus is inviting us into something so much deeper. He wants relationship with us, with you, with me, not anybody else. It's not secondhand, but He wants it firsthand with you. And so there's a beautiful invitation that kind of sums all of this up in the prophet Isaiah. After he tells us what Jesus is going to do, as he predicts who Jesus is going to be and what Jesus will do for us, that He will be crushed so that we might enjoy His free grace, that we might be able to taste the bread of life and enjoy Him, that our desires might be met in Him. Once He tells us that, then Isaiah gives us this invitation that is from God. It's from God to us. And so here's what I want to invite you to do. Would you right now just close your eyes? And I want to read this passage to you. And would you hear these words as simply an invitation today to slow down, to come before the one who gave Himself for you, and to know Him, and to taste that He is the bread of life that meets all of our desires. It's what we've been looking for. And so hear these words from Isaiah 55. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourself in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear that your soul may live. That's the invitation to us today. And so would we taste and know that Jesus is the bread of life, and would it change us from the inside out? And would we go forward knowing just what he has done for us, no longer depending on a secondhand spirituality, but embracing all that Jesus has done for us, and taste and see that he is good.